Good evening, and welcome to the first session of tonight's PEO 2020 Council Elections All Candidates Meetings. My name is Arthur Sinclair, and I will be the moderator for tonight's discussion. Tonight, we will hear from candidates for Councillor-at-Large. The four candidates participating in tonight's meeting are Daniel Lamb, David Lapp, Vaj Bandre, and Chantel Chittle. The electronic meeting with the candidates via webcast enables voters to learn more about the candidates and PEO issues, so more of them will vote. Voters were able to post questions online in advance of the discussion. We do have a number already submitted. We'll try to get at as many of those as possible. In accordance with the approved protocol for the all candidates meeting, as moderator, I may shorten the questions and not read out the preambles to questions, may select any question, may remove offensive and duplicate questions, and may add questions not on the platform. Each candidate will be provided 2 minutes for opening remarks. I will then direct a question to a candidate. That candidate will have 1 minute to respond to the question. After the candidate has responded, the three remaining candidates will have 1 minute to address the first candidate's response to the question. Following the question period, the candidates will have 90 seconds for each closing remark. The order of speakers was determined by a draw earlier this evening. The views and opinions expressed on this broadcast do not necessarily reflect the views of the PEO and are the responsibility of the candidates. So, without further delay, let's get started. Opening remarks. The first candidate for Councillor-at-Large is Daniel Lamb.
Thank you so much, Arthur, and good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for tuning in today's all-candidate debate meeting as it relates to the PEO Councillor-at-Large meeting. The Volkswagen emissions scandal, the 2012 Elliott Mall collapse, the 2011 Fukushima nuclear disaster there. Those are just some examples where, unfortunately, regulations failed to protect the public. The role of PEO as a regulator is one that is very, very important. There are over 8,500 members of professional engineers inside the province of Ontario. In order to be able to fulfill its mandate as it relates to protecting the public, the PEO is given, as I mentioned earlier, a very, very difficult time. We have to be able to account for all of the human factors. It is with regards to the fact that we have to be, when we're initially somebody applies to be a license holder, we have to look carefully with regards to their ability to be able to act in good faith, to be competent, to be somebody who cares about the engineering profession and acts with integrity as well as good judgment. In my personal opinion is that while discipline as well as continuing education can make very important points with regards to maintaining the importance of our professional engineering profession here, it is very important that we focus more with regards to figuring a way with regards to having the right leadership structure in place in order to be able to focus first and foremost on health and safety. We need to be an organization, the PEO, to be one that actually leads all of Ontario to provide high standards of technical competencies across the boards so that in the future, our profession can continue to thrive as well too. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The second candidate for Councillor-at-Large is David Lapp.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator, and welcome to everyone to this session. It's an honor for me to be nominated to be for a Councillor-at-Large, and I want to thank those who nominated me. After nearly 23 years as a senior staff member at Engineers Canada, supporting our profession at the national and international level, and now retired, I thought to bring my experience and expertise working with all 12 engineering regulators to support PEO as it evolves to become a modern and effective regulator that is relevant to the public that it serves. For many years, I was part of the Secretariat for the Canadian Engineering Qualifications Board, and I provided support and sometimes co-authorship of a number of national practice guidelines on subjects that included continuing competence, climate change, environmental stewardship, and environmental engineering. As PEO evolves and puts in place its governance, administrative, and organizational structures, I understand this work will be mostly completed by the time the next council has its first meeting. Therefore, my focus will be to support the development and initial implementation of the 23 to 25 strategic plan. I'm excited to provide input into this plan and to engage in dialogue with fellow council members. Thanks.
Thank you. The third candidate for Councillor-at-Large is Vaj Bande.
Sorry, Arthur, I just joined a little bit late. I just would like to have some clarification during the debate. Am I allowed to take some notes?
Oh, you can take all the notes you like.
Thank you. I just wanted your permission. Don't want to disturb the forum because
there's no
okay,
apologies.
and I don't think that should be counted towards my opening statement.
That's fair.
You said that. Thank you. Okay. Good evening, and first of all, Happy New Year to all other candidates and Mr. Sinclair, who's moderating this debate. My name is Vajahat Bande. I go by name Vaj Bande. I'm a candidate for Councillor-at-Large for 2022 PO elections. And among the other candidates, I personally know Ms. Cheddle. We have been friends for many years. We may not agree on many issues. That's fine. That's how things are. So I am running for this election because in past couple of years, I have seen that PEO has been falling behind on its mandate. We have not been doing anything to address the issue of emerging disciplines. We still seem to be living in 1930s. We have not been doing anything how to attract young entrepreneurial engineers and get them licensed. We seem to be making decisions, and in fact, in particular, council needs to be making decisions in secret, which are undemocratic, against the wishes of the people. On certain issues, if referendum is required, council makes decision. Oh no, we don't want it. So vote for me is vote for democratic principles. Vote for me is vote for venturing into the 21st century. Vote for me is vote for engineers, and vote for me is vote for holding your values and beliefs up, being held at the council. So it is you, my members, my fellow engineers, who should make decisions, who should decide, who should represent them as Councillor-at-Large for 2022 PEO council elections. Please, and thanks to all of you who have joined to watch this debate. Please visit my website, www.votevaj.com, to know more about me as a candidate. Thank you.
The fourth candidate for Councillor-at-Large is Chantel Chittle.
Thank you, Arthur. Good evening, everyone. My name is Chantel Chittle, and I am running as Councillor-at-Large. I believe in a strong and effective engineering self-regulator. It is vitally important to all that council support PEO's mandate to regulate in the public interest, that is to protect the public. I believe all council members must understand the real problems facing PEO, have the ability to adapt to change, and to make policies based on facts, not opinions. Some key areas of focus I believe are necessary for PEO to meet its mandate are a streamlined licensing process that is clearly documented and traceable, and like others have said, valid for the 21st century. Through the Regulatory Policy and Legislative Committee, PEO has been looking at what other jurisdictions are doing with respect to qualifications-based selection, removing bias in the processes, and moving forward with requirements underneath the Washington Accord, to name a few. Second, undertaking meaningful and relevant consultation with public and other stakeholders such as chapters. PEO currently does not do a very good job at asking for or receiving feedback. Recently, at a chapter leaders conference, council sought feedback from chapter representatives and will be using the information to help make some decisions moving forward. PEO has to address report recommendations related to unfair and unbiased processes or biased processes. Currently, the work of the Anti-Racism Working Group, council is moving forward with addressing several concerns, such as the need to develop several policy statements to implement recommendations in the report to remove bias and discrimination in all the policies. And fourth, I believe the development and continued use of policy metrics such as key performance indicators are necessary for PEO to ensure that it's meeting its critical mandate for protecting the public. Thank you.
And now that concludes the opening remarks segment. We're going to go to the questions. As a reminder, where the question order, the initial question order is the same order as the introductions. And then after that, we will be rotating through. So if you respond last, you end up answering the next question first. So just so you are ready, and it's going to be always in the same order. So the first question going to Daniel, and we're going to give you an opportunity to just talk a little bit about yourself. First question we'd ask you, what special skills, experience, or ideas do you bring to enhance the governance of the PEO?
Thank you so much for the question there, Arthur. So for myself, currently, I am serving actually as an elected representative for a union that is consisting mostly of various professionals from inside the electricity sector there. And with the way that my particular constituents that I'm representing, they actually are spread out throughout the entire province. So I am very familiarized with regards to engaging a membership throughout an entire province with regards to making sure that we hear the key voices with regards to the needs of the various members of PEO. I have experiences with regards to a training and development background, which is a big part of my platform, is that I'm somebody who was actually, although I have a training and development background, I'm against the idea of mandatory continuing education because I don't think it's actually as effective as what it is that a lot of the outside bodies might lead us to believe. I believe in particular health and safety, which is one thing that I introduced in their opening remarks and says that that's something that we really need to concentrate on in order for PEO to be effective. Thanks, Alpha.
And the next speaker, David Lapp.
Hi, so I want to bring to bear on this my experience as a senior staff person at Engineers Canada. And having that grasp of issues from the national level, I've worked with all 12 regulators, including PEO, for many years on issues around admissions, practice, enforcement. And I feel that my expertise and experience can be brought to bear on this. So I feel that in addition, I've certainly served in a volunteer capacity on boards, community-based boards. I've supported chapter meetings. My particular area of expertise is climate change and environment and sustainability. So that's something that I feel needs to be, is lacking greatly in PEO and is a huge public issue that we need to be involved in. So I hope to bring that to the table, and particularly in the next strategic plan. And I think that I feel that I have a very good network across the country and a decent network in Ontario to consult at the grassroots level with engineers. Thanks.
Thank you very much. The third question, or third candidate, Tavaj. So what special skills, experience, ideas do you bring?
Sorry, thanks. I was sorry, Arthur, I was muted. Sorry. Okay, so the special skills and experience I bring to be your council candidate. I have experience of being a PEO volunteer for about 17 years. I served as a Lieutenant Governor appointee on PEO Council in 2019. In the past, when there used to be transparency at PEO committees, I used to serve on advisory committee on volunteers. I have served on various PEO task forces and organizing committees, like I was twice a member of Chapter Leaders Conference organizing committee, and I served on organizing committee for PEO Education Committee, which used to be a very good committee, and because of some decision from one councillor is now defunct. I also served on various boards. I am currently a member of E4P Engineers for Canada, Engineers for Profession, sorry, and also a member of PEO Saugeen Shores Football Club, as well as I served on United Society of United Professionals board. In addition to that, Equity and Diversity Committee at my
Thank you very much.
place of employment for 5 years. Thank you.
Thank you. And the last response goes to Chantal.
Thank you. I've been volunteering with PEO for 15 years, but I've been an engineer or working in the engineering field for over 20. And throughout that time, I've worked closely with other volunteers at PEO through my employment with some of my colleagues. I have worked for municipal employers as a design engineer and a project manager, as well as I worked for consulting in the consulting field. And currently I work on the other side as a construction engineer. I am currently on council. I have, like Vaj, have been on some committees, organizing committees like the Chapter Leaders Conference, and have been volunteering on various PEO chapter committees for my whole time. And I think that my diligence over the last 2 years on council and my questioning and challenging nature has proven a benefit to our membership. So I hope to continue. Thank you.
Thank you. And we're going to have to remind everybody of this. So most of you went to the red zone on the clock. So I see Neem compelled to remind everybody that it was 1 minute responses. Just because it seems like a lot of people have mentioned it within their comments, and I can also I'm going to say there's a number of questions that pertain to it within the online comments, which anybody can see if they like. So we might as well just jump straight into it. I figure what the first question goes to Chantal, and then down the list. What are your thoughts on mandatory continuing professional development in general for engineers?
10 years ago, or even 5 years ago, I would have had a different answer than I do tonight. Throughout my career, I've always maintained my competency through education opportunities through my employers. So I didn't think it was a big deal. But I've come to realize through some of my interaction with people on the CAB, Engineers Canada Board, that our license holders are at risk of losing their mobility, interprovincial mobility, and our international mobility through other agreements because of our licensure model and the fact that we don't have continuing competency like the mandatory program. So unfortunately, in order to be able to support our membership being able to get licensed in other provinces and other jurisdictions, we have to do that. We're the only province that doesn't have mandatory continuing professional development. So like I said, 5 years ago, my answer was different. Thanks.
Thank you. First response goes to Daniel.
Yes, so as indicated earlier, my stance on this is that understanding developing a core effective mandatory education program is very, very difficult. And considering the number of different engineering different segments that actually exist under the engineering professional here, I'm personally against the idea of continuing education because I have licensing in other areas where there is a need for profession with regards to continuing educations, and I have not seen the effectiveness associated with continuing education. I think we need to be careful when speaking with other jurisdiction and other stakeholders at the table. That seems to say that, yes, Chantal's correct, that the other engineering provinces does have it with their regulators, but for us, I think we can figure out the right story to tell in order to set the right context, in order for the public to better understand that we are actually doing already a decent job with regards to regulating our own professional here.
Thank you. Next response to David.
I feel strongly that we should have a mandatory continuing professional development program to keep up with the times of maintaining our competencies as engineers. All the other regulators have programs in place. As Chantal mentioned, it will become, maybe not right now, but as time goes on, a mobility issue where if PO does not have continuing competence program, this could cause issues around registration in other jurisdictions when an Ontario engineer wants to go elsewhere. and could also affect their eligibility for international agreements for mobility. So certainly that's a longer term factor that could come out of that. And also, I just feel that, and it's really part of the act, that we are responsible to show the public that we are doing something about this to maintain the competency of our members. I think it's an obligation under the act. Thank you.
Thank you. Last response to that question regarding continuing professional development to Vash.
Okay, so my personal opinion, and I'm actually in favor of CPD, continuous professional development. However, having said that, I would have loved to have that decision being done through a referendum, which is actually already made, that the CPD is going to be mandatory. That the council made that decision without membership input, when we were promised, the members in general, that if CPD is to be made mandatory, there will be a referendum. Thanks to current council, one of them, a candidate here, voted in favor of removing that obligation on the council, that no, we do not need a referendum to make it mandatory. So I will restate that personally, I'm in favor of it. I would have definitely voted if there was a referendum to make it mandatory, but that was an undemocratic decision made by the council when they took that initiative away from the members and made a decision on their own.
Thank you. So the next question first goes to Vash, and we're going to go a little bit of current events. And we're all working from home right now, so talking about COVID, what challenges and opportunities are apparent from how PEO operations responded to the COVID pandemic? How should PEO prepare for similar emergencies or disruptions in the future?
Just to be clear, I'm not working from home. I do work on site. Anyways, yes, none of us were actually prepared, not including PEO. The whole world wasn't prepared for this pandemic of this nature. So we can see now, whole world has seen, including PEO, that things can be done virtually with same effectiveness. So imagine if our chapter meetings, if chapters do continue to be in place, which I don't think, as per the Clayton's report, in chapter meetings, council meetings, like the debate we are having, as well as other committee PEO meetings are going to be done virtually, how much saving we would have, and that money which PEO can use for something better engineering initiatives. So was PEO prepared? Nobody was. So in future, and we will be in this situation for a while, to my understanding. We need to enhance our IT resources, and we have seen that virtual world works, and we can continue to do that by enhancing our IT resources at PEO.
Thank you. First response to Chantal. PEO's response to COVID-19.
Yeah, sure. No problem. Like Vaj said, no one was prepared. PEO was no different. But the opportunity I've seen is the PEO was able to pivot. They really pushed and changed direction with regards to moving away from a paper-based license application process. And while it wasn't as fast as I think most of us would have liked, they were able to pivot quite well. We were able to look at hosting events on the provincial level, at the local level, virtually. Which I think if we can continue that success of being able to have more people involved either in person and virtually, we'll be able to reach some more people. So I'm looking forward to the lessons learned from our virtual world that we're in right now tonight and in the last 2 years. Thanks.
Next response to Daniel.
Thank you for Vaj as well, Chantal, for giving that input initially. And I do understand when it comes to the PEO initially, trying to process applications, switching to a digital mode, there was a lot of difficulties. The fact is that it seems like now, unfortunately, with pandemic numbers being an all-time high there, that with kids just returning to remote learning today as well, too, that this is difficult times for everybody. It's just the one thing is I think it's very important that we be a little bit more kinder to each other. We figure out new ways of doing things, but also we have to be cognizant that while PEO has a number of chapters that's in place, which is geographically centered there, by switching over into a virtual regime there, it does increase their difficulties with regards to operations there. So while there's a lot of opportunities that's been created, like the cost savings that Raj has mentioned, there are also a lot of risk factors that we have to navigate as we try to go to this digital world as well too. Thank you.
And the last response to David.
Yeah, I think PEO has done a pretty good job of adapting to COVID-19 in the sense that, where they were when it started and where we are now, there's been a lot of progress, and COVID's kind of forced us to learn to adapt and to operate virtually. And I think it's the results show that, virtual work and virtual meetings can work. It doesn't entirely replace the face-to-face, but certainly a lot of work can get done and is being done. And COVID's been a trigger, I think, for some of the changes, accelerated some of the initiatives at the operational level. And I think going forward that, the lessons learned in responding to COVID could form the basis of a plan, that an emergency response plan to handle other emergencies, so that if it's a new CEO or other individuals on staff involved, there is a track or a record, I guess, of response. So thank you.
Thank you. And since we're in the world of challenges, that's a bit of a SWOT analysis. Next question goes to David. And what weaknesses, if any, should PEO seek to improve in its role as a regulator or in its governance model?
Well, I think the weakness, PEO is in a weak position with respect to our provincial government. I think an example of that is the fact that the 1-year Canadian experience was removed from the admission requirement, which, not so much why and the rationale for it, but the process by which that happened is that there's a degree of intervention that is creeping in there from the Ontario government, and PEO needs to demonstrate its value and so forth to make sure that it is considered a partner with the provincial government and providing regulation of the profession. So I think that's a big weakness that we really need to work on. And it's not advocacy in the traditional sense. It's more advocacy around the engineering profession and the engineering perspective to show that we add value to the overall system of regulation in Ontario. Thanks.
And the first response to Vaj, what weaknesses, if any, should PEO seek to improve?
Some of the weaknesses PEO should seek to improve. Of late, PEO seems to be getting involved in petty politics, picking up fights with our sister organizations like OSPE, or Ontario Society of Professional Engineers. We need to get over that. That's a weakness. PEO has spent actually, in my opinion, millions on a program which is very useless, has produced no result at all. That's called Government Liaison Program, GLP or GL, which is popularly known as. And PEO, one of its weaknesses, they have not expanded their mandate beyond those 5 designated engineering disciplines which they have been licensing. They have not been doing anything on the emerging disciplines. For example, software engineering, one of the fastest growing fields in the last 20 years, they cannot be licensed. Or material science, biomedical engineering, cybersecurity, and so on and so forth. We are not doing anything to attract our young entrepreneurial engineers to get licensed. These are some of the weaknesses PEO has.
Next response to Chantal.
Thanks. I think there are a few different weaknesses I think we could all speak to, and we could spend a whole night on some of that. I think one of the main ones I find and I am troubled by is PEO's tendency to throw band-aid solutions at problems. They'll do a solution that'll be a short-term gain and not looking long-term or without getting to the root of the problem. And I think that has done us a bit of a disservice over the last at least 2 decades that I've witnessed. A lot of fly-by-night changes, pivoting back and forth. And I'm looking forward to a time when PEO can focus its energies on solving root problems instead of just throwing up temporary solutions.
And the last response to this question to Daniel.
Yeah, so I know the question has to deal with weaknesses, but I think it's also very important that we focus on the fact is that the POs acknowledge with regards to that there is a modernization when it comes to the governance structure. There is a need with regards to us looking at emerging disciplines. There's a need with regards to us looking at the fact is that when it comes to the development of technology, by the very nature of it, there is inherent risk associated with regards to the models that exist. And with that particular model and risk, that I think engineers are actually very, very primed to set up to take advantage with regards to the risk and being a very fundamental part of protecting the public as well as promoting overall a better overall environment of health and safety throughout our entire province here. The fact is we weren't prepared as it relates to COVID, but when it comes to trying to pivot as well as having the right people in place, we should all be very proud with regards to what we have there and making that. Thank you.
Thank you. So I want to give a little bit of acknowledgement of some of the questions online, and there was a number of questions about licensing. And I wanted to give I don't preamble too much, but just to give you some of the ones that I have here. So we have, do you believe PEO's licensing process should have standardized timelines for hitting the milestones through the process? Should PEO use key performance indicators or other similar matrices to evaluate the success of the licensing process? If you believe the licensing process is flawed, what should be done to fix it? And do you believe that there are issues with the current licensing process? Do you believe the process needs change? So those are 4 different questions I received, but I wanted to read them all verbatim just within the theme of licensing. So this question goes to Daniel. And do you believe that so I'll use the question that came online. Do you believe that there are issues with the current license process, and do you believe the process needs to be changed?
Yeah, so thanks, the offer. Just looking at the fact is that we acknowledge that when there was the switch from the pandemic as well as COVID, there was obviously some delays and impacts as a result of that particular switch. I believe that all else being equal, quicker is better. But in order for us to be able to maintain a high standard for profession, I do believe we need to do our due diligence when it comes to the licensing process. Since I mentioned earlier when it comes to, I don't support with regards to continuing education, but I do support with regards to looking at with regards to stronger licensing processes up front in order to make sure that instead of just having one simple ethics test that we need to be able to look at to make sure that we have I'm happy that I am actually quite involved with some of the PEO chapters and acting as a mentor there. You can help a lot with regards to younger engineers to figure out their place, but there's still a lot of work needs to be done to develop better engineers. Thank you.
And first response to David, licensing issues.
Yeah, I think the licensing process that is done by PEO is in some ways very, very rigid and inflexible, particularly with respect to engineers from outside of our country who are not CAB graduates or experienced engineers. And this is causing issues, because of delays in getting these people licensed. And the Ontario government is noticing that because they want to streamline and get folks, qualified folks, into the workforce. So it all kind of licensing leads to that issue with the provincial government. So I think one of the things is to examine the licensing process and to set some timelines, as was suggested as a possibility, and the key performance indicators for sure should all be put in place, of course, with some flexibility for interpretation in exceptional circumstances and situations that can't be met. And also, I think there should be some flexibility between trading off between academic
Thank you.
meeting academic requirements and experience. Thank you.
And next response with respect to licensing to Vaj.
Issues with licensing process. Yes, there are some issues with licensing process. Of late, I have heard that it has been taking a lot of time for for candidates who want to get licensed. PEO purchased a software, paid millions for that's called Aptify to resolve these issues. I don't know what happened. And one of my opponents talked about candidates. David talked about the IPTE, International Professional Trained Engineers, while Government of Ontario recently passed what we call Bill 27 that seems to address that issue. In terms of the educational and experience requirements, I personally think I agree with those requirements, like 4 years after bachelor's and 1 year Canadian experience, 4 years of experience, 1 year in a Canadian jurisdiction. How do we fill the gap for internship professionals? That has been addressed with Bill 27. So that's my response to this question.
Thank you. The last response to Chantal.
Thanks. Well, I received my license and went through the process over 20 years ago, and sadly, I do see similar issues that were encountered 20 years ago are still being encountered by our potential license holders currently in 2021. So yes, I do think the process needs to have a full-scale review and an overhaul, because our path to licensure right now is very rigid, like David said, and very linear. And not everybody goes from A to B to C. And where we lose people out on the nonlinear aspect are the emerging disciplines or the entrepreneur engineers that are coming through. Their path isn't the same as my path, and their path isn't the same as Vaj's or David's. And so why is our process so rigid that everybody has to go through the same path I did, even though I encountered problems even back then? So yeah, I do believe there are changes needed. Thank you.
And staying in the theme of licensure, the next question to you, Chantal. From a public protection standpoint, what, if any, value do you see in PEO efforts to increase the rate of licensure of engineering graduates, Canadian or internationally trained?
Oh, that's a tough question. I'm not sure how our profession and protecting the public is served by increasing license members. I really I'm torn with that question. I believe that to protect the public, we have to ensure that the people that we present our licenses to are capable, ethical, professional, and meet all of the standards that we lay out. So I'm not sure. I don't necessarily believe that increasing our numbers of licensed members protects the public any better that if we have a continue on with the growth level that we're doing right now. Thank you.
And the first response to that question with respect to efforts to increase the rate of licensure, to Daniel.
I am understanding with regards to some inside the profession who wants to see with regards to having more young people go through the license process and obtain their PNG license in order to grow the profession. But similar to what actually Chantal said, that the role of PEO as a regulator compared to OPSI as the advocacy body, that this is where there is concern with regards to the way the question is asked. Like, I'm actually somebody who, I think the biggest argument we have when it comes to self-regulation and supporting our profession is that we need high quality, high standard engineers. And when we look at with regards to increasing the pool, I do see issues with regards to software engineers there with regards to if they were acting in ways that would harm the well-being of the public, that sometimes PO could be negatively affected. So I guess my reversal of this particular question is that the PO needs to do an outreach out there, whether it is employer, universities, or young people, to get the buy-in that PO licensing is good for them.
Thank you. The next response to David.
Yeah, I think this problem, we recognize it as a problem, and we have some indirect and anecdotal understanding of the problem and where it might be. But I think it needs a further diagnosis in order to determine which areas perhaps are at most, one might say, risk to the public. And of course, emerging disciplines being one area that we know is registration is very low. And we have to really use the litmus test. What is the impact of a person on public safety, of being licensed, and using that as one of the measures of whether or not, an individual should be licensed or not, because it is a big problem in the sense of the magnitude. And we need to, I think, study it a little bit further just to get a better diagnosis. And then, as was mentioned, to do outreach to those groups that we feel need to be targeted to improve their understanding and the need for getting licensed. Thank you.
Thank you. And the last response with respect to this, the increasing the rate of licensure of engineers, to Vaj.
Thank you, Arthur, for the question. So some points for increasing the rate of engineering graduates. So CPO seems to be out of touch in reality. We still live in 1930s. One area we have not addressed and should be included in its mandate is emerging disciplines, areas like software engineering, cybersecurity, biomedical engineering, etc. We are not licensing them. We haven't done an abysmal job at selling our mandate to young engineering grads. As I said, we are out of touch with reality, and they don't understand why is it important to license, and why would they go for this process of going through this rigor of getting licensed when they don't understand the value. And we need to do a better job at that. Maybe advocacy part should be given to OSPI. Maybe they probably will do a better job at selling our image and getting more engineering grads to get licensed, and even including entrepreneurial engineers.
Thank you. And I was going to do this anyways, but I've heard the term software engineer twice now, and I wanted to, there's a question that came online that is from a software engineer. So I'm abbreviating the question a little bit, but I want to highlight that this individual has identified themselves as a software engineer. And they are saying in their question, this is the first year that I have seriously contemplated whether to renew my PEng license. What can PEO do to attract and retain software engineering disciplines? And that first question, that first goes to Vaj.
Okay, yes, and I see that, and it's not this particular individual. There are many people who I have talked from the grassroots level. They say, I don't see any reason why I should renew my license. PEO does not recognize software engineering as a discipline. First, right there, this person is lucky enough. If he or she has been licensed, he probably had to go through ARC, and being interviewed in some other discipline other than the software engineering by an expert from some other engineering area. And same thing happens to others. PEO has not done anything to address, gentlemen and lady, to address your issues, your problem. And they don't care. I don't know why don't they? We are still living in 1930s and haven't expanded its mandate. And a person like you, we will be losing, who is seriously thinking of not renewing their license, will be losing because PEO hasn't reached out to you and individuals like you. I don't know. We need to do a better job at that. Why are we losing engineers?
Thank you. And the next response for that question to Chantal.
Yeah, thanks. So I'm going to fall back or pick on past council in previous 5, 10, 15, 20 years. It has been a travesty that PEO council and PEO didn't move forward and look at the emerging discipline issue and failed to recognize and encourage and appropriately regulate areas of expertise like software engineering. And I think that is one of the drawbacks of the Band-Aid solutions and the ever-changing council priority of who does what and being distracted by all these other things that are happening. And they dropped the ball and they didn't move forward. And, PEO needs to move that forward as part of overhauling the license process to ensure that we do license those individuals and to retain them.
Thank you. Next response to Daniel.
The way I see it is that aside from being the only province that does not have a continuing education program yet, is that PEO does benefit from the fact that we have the lowest fees out of all of the other provincial engineering regulators here. When it comes to what value it is that holding a PN license or membership has, is that I really see the fact is that it's an additional qualification. We need to be out there with regards to, as I mentioned, connecting with employers, making them recognize with regards to the value that PN can give to their overall organization. And this is where I really want to focus with regards to if we are doing some type of an education program or the licensing program when it comes to bringing someone through these particular processes that we have to, I can see PEO, while we have our mandate as a regulator, we have a very existing valuable chapter system that in place that could actually make the value of the membership worth it by itself there. Thank you.
And the last response to David.
Yes, I certainly would concur with my colleagues that emerging disciplines has been an abysmal effort by PEO, but also the other 11 regulators. So PEO is not alone in this in Canada. We do have issues. Some regulators are better, like BC. I think we should look to BC for some guidance there. But the real issue here is, what is software engineering? And I think we need to have a paper that is developed on that. So, and in fact, there is a paper that was produced by Engineers Canada on what is software engineering, a version that's on their site that is also under review at the moment. And the process to develop that paper is to consult with the practitioners, both licensed and non-licensed, to determine and using criteria around what is the practice of professional engineering, create that paper, and then from there you can lead to the qualifications and practice-based guidance that is required to regulate such practitioners. So I think there is a pathway to do this, and there's resources to start. Thanks.
Now, again, sort of bouncing between the pre-prepared questions, which I know you all have, and themes that follow with online. There's a number of themes online where people are mentioning governance. So positive, negative, there's a number of questions about it. I'll go to this pre-prepared question here specifically. And the first one going to David. In March 2020, PEO Council approved a new governance roadmap. And in November 2020, Council approved a time work plan to implement the roadmap. Please highlight what new governance directions are most important to you as a prospective councillor.
So I think the principle of participation in decision making is a very important component in that strategic direction, policies, standards, and so forth remain with council, and the operational implementation of those lies with the CEO and the staff. And I think there's been, in the past, I've certainly witnessed a lot of interference from individual councillors or council members into operational matters, which muddies the waters and sometimes prevents progress. So I think making sure there's a very clear distinction between what council is responsible for and what staff are responsible for and how they interact with each other. And having that all understood by all parties is the most important piece of that new governance structure. Thanks.
Thank you. And the first response with respect to the governance directions to Vaj.
Okay, thank you. So the governance structure, which actually, in my opinion, came from Mr. Harry Clayton's recommendation when he did the PEO governance overview. I actually agree with one of his recommendations, that is a number of irrelevant committees and task forces we have at PEO. And I agree with that. I don't agree with that. PEO should pick up its counselors rather than, so we have only appointed counselors rather than elected. In addition to that, I do agree with what Dave was saying. There seems to be that sometimes PEO past counselors would step on the governance side, the operation side of PEO. I am not interested in those. How many staff members and what are their salaries and how many areas of PEO building should be rented. That's all operation side. There should be a clear delineation between the governance and the operation side. But this whole governance structure came from Harry Clayton's report, and I have deep concerns with that report done by a non-professional engineer, very discredited non-professional engineer.
And the second response with respect to governance directions to Chantal.
Yeah, thanks. I think the most important aspect of the governance roadmap for me as a current councillor and moving forward, if I am on council again, is that council has decided to become a governing and a control board as opposed to an intervening board, which means that they'll stay out of the operations, as well as this current phase and the next phase of the roadmap, which is looking at council composition, skills matrix. How do we become on council? How do we make sure we fill the gaps? Because we're all awesome people, but sometimes council needs a little bit more expertise, and perhaps there's a way to fill that gap. And I'm looking forward to buttoning up some of those things, like Vaj mentioned, the ever increasing number of committees and stuff like that. So, yeah, thanks.
And the last response with respect to the governance directions to Daniel.
Yeah, so the one thing is that obviously the Clayton report made a number of recommendations. I do think strong governance and oversight provided by council, which acts as a board of directors, is very important to setting the strategical priorities as well as leading the PEO organization. But obviously, I agree with my fellow candidates when it comes to the day-to-day responsibility that should be left to the PEO CEO as well as that of staff. The council composition is actually, relatively speaking, compared to other board of directors, especially those that we see in the corporate world, is bigger than that is normally what you get in that domain. But when it comes to having proper representation, having a voice with regards to all parts there, especially people who are professional engineers who comes from the profession, is such an important thing there. So thank you so much there. Thank you.
Thank you. And again, we're staying with the theme of governance, but talking a little bit about you. Next question goes to Daniel. How do you see your role as a councillor in the current reform of governance as PEO?
Thank you so much there, Arthur. So for myself, as I mentioned earlier, I'm currently serving as an elected representative. I definitely do very much believe in the democracy process. I encourage those people who are tuning in today, kudos to you and other people there who's tuning in by video later on, to go out there with regards to casting your vote, have your say. But I also see that as elected councillors here, it's very important that we maintain a connection with that of our constituents, that we're out there talking, connecting with the various PO members to understand their needs, to start a discussion, to understand that we have a lot of EITs who are trying to move in the path and get licensed. We have PO members who are having a license who thinks that are they getting enough value from the license for them to continue maintaining it. We have outside stakeholders outside of the PO who wants to make sure that our profession overall is doing a good job. So trying to balance all of those, it's not easy. And a lot of times we need to work together in order to find that best solution there. Thank you.
The next response to Vaj.
Okay, thank you. As I mentioned before, the direction for governance has to come from council, and PEO operations and the staff has to find ways to implement it. However, in terms of my role as a councillor, if I am elected, we have to expand the PEO mandate to the emerging disciplines and include those emerging disciplines in our tent to get them licensed. We have to cater to the demands of young entrepreneurial engineers and get them licensed. Why are not they getting licensed? Why are we failing? So as a councillor, these are some of the directions I would like to emphasize, council to emphasize on, and move further down. Other things, petty issues, and also stay away from this politics of picking up fights with OSPI, etc. The operation side, leave it to operations and the governance to come from the council. That's what I would like to continue if I'm elected as a councillor at large.
Thank you. And the last response with respect to the councillor's role to Chantal.
Thanks, Arthur, but I'm not the last response. I don't think David's actually answered as well. So, so don't forget David. So the individual role of a council member, I'd like to say gatekeeper, ask questions, push, investigate, make sure that the information before us is appropriate, that we're setting the appropriate direction and policies for staff to be able to undertake the work that the regulator needs to do, including, as Vaj and others have said, with regards to the emerging discipline. We need to make sure that we're working together, asking, everyone to come to the table with open minds and to ensure that we provide clear direction to staff to go from point A to B, as opposed to leaving everything open-ended. And sometimes we get a lot of wiggle room and things don't go as fast as we'd like. So that's what I think. Thank you.
All right, and I guess I'm going to have to follow my sword and claim some human error here. So did I miss David on the response on this one? All right, my apologies, David. And what I'm going to do is, because I did skip you on my little thingy, I will go back. The next answer will be to Chantal, because she was supposed to be the last on it. So my sincere apologies, David, over to you. Your role as a councillor in the governance PO.
Sure, I think as a councillor, I'm part of a team. So the whole notion of healthy debate, asking questions of each other, is an important element of being a councillor. Also, that by the time that this next council meets, my understanding is that most of the governance review and so forth should have been completed and essentially approved, maybe with the exception of the chapters piece, which the next council will deal with. And so that'll certainly be part of our responsibility as councillors to finalize that. And my feeling, or my sort of focus or emphasis, is on the strategic plan, the next strategic plan to implement those things like emerging disciplines and other licensure issues and so forth, those kinds of policies and so forth. That needs to be incorporated into the strategic plan. And that's where I feel I could make my contribution, as one might say, as a new guy on the block.
Thank you. Again, my apologies. So the next question, being me getting back in order, will be to Chantal, with responses in the appropriate order. And going back to the online board, looking at, there's been a number of questions that acknowledge elements of risk. So I just want to give some credit to the individuals who took the time to write some answers. We said some people with respect to risk mentioned the Caton report. They mentioned the anti-racism report, and they also mentioned concerns from the Office of the Fairness Commissioner. And there's a generalized question here: what should council do to mitigate risk? I'm going to swing it and put it to some of the more prepared questions and ask to you, Chantal, what do you see as the biggest threat to self-regulation as it pertains to PEO and the engineering profession?
Oh, the biggest risk, I think, is PEO's inability at times to change. And thankfully, over the last couple of years and hopefully into the future, that won't be as much of a risk. And PEO's failure to recognize when the pudding's going to hit the wall. I think the recent government intervention that was mentioned earlier this evening with regards to the removal or the requirement to remove the 12-month Canadian experience, it's not the first time PEO has heard that that question or that ask. It was raised by the Ontario Fairness Commissioner. It was raised by the Human Rights Tribunal. I believe it was discussed in the AIRREG report, the Anti-Racism and Discrimination report. So this isn't the first time, but and it's been a number of years that they've heard the same story, but failed to act on it. And so now we have the government intervening. So we need to act when we hear.
Thank you. And the first response with respect to biggest threat to self-regulation, to Daniel.
Thank you, Arthur. So self-regulation is actually something that still exists quite a bit in Canada, but when we look at other jurisdictions as it relates to Britain, as it relates to the US, it's something that's been quite a bit of a challenge, because a lot of the outsiders do see that there is a bit of a conflict of interest when it comes to people inside the professional trying to regulate themselves. And I think this is where it's very important that as councillors, we need to be acting as the leaders out there with regards to providing the best context story, telling them, the people, the fact that we are people who actually have skin in the game here. We are people who actually want to see the engineering professional succeed. We want to be proud when we are able to say that we are a professional engineering license holder. So this is all stuff that is very, very important there. If we're able to take care of that, then we will be able to dismiss the concerns as it relates to self-regulation, but we need strong leadership there. Thank you.
Thank you. And the next response to David with respect to self-regulation.
Yes, I think there is a real threat, perhaps in the medium to long term, from the Ontario government to remove self-regulation, or at least elements of it. Certainly, we saw that in BC with their new act, which has quite a few changes to it in terms of how relative responsibilities and so forth. So we have some evidence that governments are prepared to move, and so not responding to the various reports that make recommendations, from government-based reviews, needs to be absolutely addressed and progress to be shown. So I think that's and as was mentioned, outreach from councillors to explain these changes and so forth would be an additional component of our role as a councillor. Thank you.
Thank you. And then next response to Vaj.
Okay, so the question, the biggest threat, and it's being mentioned, the government is looking seriously at PEO, and why? Because of our past track record, what we were doing when we were picking members for the PEO committees based on their race, color, creed, etc., not based on their competencies, and those people are kept on getting retained at PEO committees for decades. And PEO just is implementing in full the Harry Clayton's report, and one of it is just to have only appointed councillors at PEO council. And if we get into that, so it is government actually who will be controlling PEO council. If I get elected, I'm committed to hold the principle of self-regulation, which in my personal opinion, it otherwise is on its last legs because of the past practices of PEO, what they had been doing over the years. And it's probably the cat is already out of the bag now. I hope we don't get there.
Thank you. And just looking at the time and how much, looking forward, this will probably be our last question, and first one's going to go to Vaj. How should council go about developing a vision for PEO for the next 5 years?
Okay, good. In order to develop the vision for PEO for next 5 years, PEO Council should expand its mandate and include emerging disciplines. We at E4P Engineers for Profession have been asking for it for years and years. Number one. Number two, we have to cater to the demands of why young entrepreneur engineers are not getting licensed. What are we doing? Number three, we need to get over this petty politics of getting involved with whose jurisdiction it is, and OSPN, etc. Number four, we need to hold the opinion of members. If members are promised something by council, that's a referendum, and we are not doing that, council has to hold that. To me, it's undemocratic. Council makes a decision on its own and then says, "Oh, government is coming after us." Why not? Because this is not fair. This is undemocratic. So those directions have to come from council in next 5 years.
Thank you. And the first response with respect to developing a vision for the next 5 years to Chantal.
Yeah, thanks. I think council has to engage various members, stakeholders, the public, employers, clients, those kinds of things, those kinds of people to help set the direction for where we need to go with regards to licensing, with regards to competency, with regards to standards development, and those types of things. It's not just the 25 people sitting around the table talking about it. We have to have and bring other people in, and it's not just staff, it's not just council, it's not just chapter members. We have to have a wider group, but that we do need to set our vision to meet our mandate, and that includes our, the emerging disciplines and those types of portfolios that we've left behind over the last number of years. Thanks.
Thank you. And the next response with respect to developing a vision for the next 5 years to Daniel.
The idea associated with 5-year vision is one that's actually very interesting to me, because I'll be honest, like, not talking about 5 years, even 2 years ago, I don't think anybody could have predicted where we will be today, partially because of the results associated with the pandemic. We need to have strong staff. We need to have strong counselors. We need to be able to display leadership when it comes to trying to move PEO forward here. There shouldn't be any doubts. The fact is that if we can promote health and safety, if we can promote high standards, we can promote responsibility. We can promote responsibility to look at high priority items such as climate change. Those are the key items that I think PEO has to get itself involved in, stepping outside of its zone there, increasing its mandate, and then also looking at the fact is focusing on areas that we can all agree on and then trying to make them better is where I think we need to go with this. Thank you.
Thank you. And the last response to David.
Yes, I think, first of all, a vision is needed for sure, given where we are with PEO and the various machinations that's been going through over the last few years. And I think that requires not only an internal process to perhaps develop some ideas around vision, but then a fuller consultation with various stakeholders who interact with or benefit from the work of PEO. And that includes government, practitioners, outside of the tent of the council and staff. So I think that's really important to get their input and to do a process of perhaps circulating drafts and perhaps having focus groups, those sorts of ideas around to refine the vision, and then of course present that for approval by the council at, within an appropriate amount of time. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Now, this concludes the question portion of the meeting. And now each candidate will have 90 seconds for closing remarks. We'll follow the same order as the original draw during the opening remarks. And so the first closing remarks to Daniel Lam, your closing remarks.
Thank you, everybody, for tuning in tonight with regards to listening to today's call it debate with regards to the various council for the position of the Councillor-at-Large. Once again, my name is Daniel Lam, and I come before you with regards to offering myself I consider myself as a very viable candidate when it comes to this particular position. I consider my decision-making as well as my execution being very, very excellent there. I listened to the wants as well as the needs with regards to the various members. I try to figure out things. I try to look at real standpoint there. I try to look at with regards to the fact is that the PO has many different challenges. We have 85,000 plus members out there that the PO is required to regulate their performance on a day-to-day basis. This is something that is extremely difficult. This is something that is extremely challenging. But as an organization, if we have the right leadership in place and we make the right decisions, we can actually get the best result possible. And this can only be happening if we actually do our own part. We try to all do our own little part, because councillor is made out of 25, 30 people there, but we have 85,000 people that's going to be people that we're going to be regulating. We don't have control with regards to a provincial government that's going to be undergoing a re-election. So once again, thank you so much for your time. Don't forget to vote. Merci, Maywich, and have a great night there. Thank you.
David Lapp, your closing remarks. Oh, David, looks like you're still on mute.
Sorry about that. I guess relative to the other candidates, I'm a new kid on the block, and so I guess I would bring a fresh approach to looking at the issues. Certainly acknowledging all the work that's being done for the council. By the council to revise its structures and so forth. And I would just say that my focus as a councillor being new would be looking forward and focusing on the strategic plan and the elements of that plan, and covering, some of the high priority issues that have been discussed today, like emerging disciplines. I also come because I feel one of my strength areas is the climate crisis, and I believe that PEO has neglected this area, and it's one of the key public issues, and having a leadership role in that would be of benefit to PEO and its standing with government. And also would like to see a more emphasis on enforcement of the Act, particularly with respect to scope of practice. And that touches on emerging disciplines, and that we need to know what each of those emerging disciplines is with respect to engineering, so that we can enforce, because I think that's one of the areas where there is a considerable leakage, one might say, of professional practice that is not regulated and should be. So just want to thank everybody for participating in this and viewing our discussion here. Best wishes to my fellow candidates, and thank you to Arthur for moderating. And thank you again.
Thank you very much.
Right.
Chantal Chittle, your closing. Oh, excuse me. It's when I move my marker too quickly. My apologies. Vaj Bande, your final remarks.
Thanks everyone for the participation in this lively debate, and also for the people who are watching this debate. Folks, my fellow engineers, the stakes are high. And you have heard the other candidates and why I am a good candidate to represent you as Councillor-at-Large. A vote for Vaj Bande is vote for change. A vote for Vaj Bande is vote to go into the 21st century. A vote for Vaj Bande is to expand our mandate and include emerging disciplines. A vote for Vaj Bande is to listen to the demands of young entrepreneur engineers and how to make them licensed. A vote for Vaj Bande is vote for transparency. A vote for Vaj Bande is vote for self-regulation and democracy. A vote for Vaj Bande is to value the input of members. The members, it's if you have been promised something, like holding a referendum on a CPD, and now that promise has been taken away, I'm not for that. As I said, I'm in favor of CPD, but I would like to have a referendum, while some of the candidates have voted in favor of that. So I am for fairness, democracy, openness, transparency. A vote for Vajbandi is vote for engineers. A vote for Vajbandi is vote for experience. I have been serving for PEO, volunteering for PEO for about 17 years plus. A vote for Vajbandi is vote to have the chapter system still in place, which would be gone if we don't do anything. So please visit my website, www.votevaj.com. Thank you.
Chantel Chittle, your closing remarks.
Sorry, it's what we do. You're on mute. You're on mute. Thank you, everyone. It was really enjoyable to answer the questions, and thank you, Arthur, for spending your evening with us. Earlier in my opening, I noted some 4 priorities that I believed were relevant for the work of PEO now and in the future. And I think PEO can make great progress in those priorities. And I hope to continue my work to support that. So that's why I decided to run as Councillor at Large. We've talked a lot about self-regulation and self-regulators. And so what is self-regulation? If you ask 10 engineers what the definition is, you'll get 10 different answers. My answer certainly 10 years ago, again, was different than what it is now. I've always thought that a self-regulator sets the policy and regulates their license holders, and staff assist with that. And that's currently happening to some degree, not as much as it was or should be. And I believe that council needs to take a back step to staying out of operations and staying as the regulator to set the appropriate policy to ensure that our license holders are appropriately regulated, that we're regulating the new disciplines and making sure that we're not stuck with just the 4 main disciplines. And I look forward and I hope that I can have your support to continue that work that I'm so interested and passionate about. Thank you.
And this concludes tonight's discussion. I would like to thank the candidates for their participation. My sincere thank you. Also, thank you to all those watching. Your interest in the governance of the engineering profession is incredibly important. I hope you found the meeting to be informative and worth your while. As a reminder, a recording of the meeting will be on PEO's website for the duration of this election. Thank you again to everyone for participating in this discussion. And remember, your profession matters. So does your vote. Voting is quick and easy. You can vote on the internet or by phone. Voting opens on January 14th and closes at 4 p.m. on February 18th. All the information you need is on the website at www.peo.ca. Good night.